Hello history buffs and welcome back to the channel. Please do excuse the attire. It's just that I'm off to a wedding this evening, so getting a little bit of quick content in before I go. Welcome to this very special Halloween episode of Hannah's Royal Histories. Today we'll be exploring the myths and legends of Queen Anne Boleyn's ghost and the many locations that she is supposedly haunting. Nearly 500 years after her execution, Anne Boleyn still remains one of the most tragic and controversial queens in English history. But for many, her story did not end on the scaffold on the 19th of May 1536. According to countless eyewitness accounts, her spirit still wanders the grounds of all of these historical palaces and locations that had resonated with her during her life. From grand palaces to her childhood home, Anne's ghost has been recorded in no fewer than 6 locations. Some sightings report that Anne is dressed quite elegantly, like myself, except obviously she'd be wearing 1500 clothes. And others are a little bit more gruesome, where she is seen clutching her own head. So today, we're going on a ghost tour through Anne Boleyn's afterlife. We'll visit each haunted location, examine eyewitness accounts, and try to understand why 500 years later, Anne Boleyn is still capturing our interest. She was imprisoned here on the charges of adultery and treason, and this would also be the place where her life was ended on the 19th of May 1536 by the blade of a French swordman. The Tower of London has a reputation as one of the most haunted places in Britain, and Anne Boleyn is said to have been one of its most frequent spectral residents. The most spectacular account comes from the captain of the guard, whose story has been repeated for generations. One night, the captain noticed a flickering light inside the Chapel Royal of St. Peter ad Vincula. This is the chapel, of course, where Anne's remains were hastily buried after her execution. The chapel was locked and should have been completely dark. Determined to investigate, the captain fetched a ladder and climbed up to peer through the window. What he saw, he said, was extraordinary. Inside the locked chapel, a procession of knights and ladies, all dressed in ancient costume, were pacing up and down the aisle. Leading them was an elegant lady, who he later concluded resembled Anne Boleyn herself. He watched the ghostly procession for a few minutes before it completely vanished. But that's not the only sighting of Anne Boleyn's ghost at the Tower of London. In 1864, a soldier who was on duty had a much more frightening encounter. He saw a white figure approaching and, following protocol, he challenged it. When the figure didn't respond, he, naturally, because this is your go-to, plunged his bayonet directly into it. The blade apparently went straight through the spectre, as if it was made of air. Now, you might think that this sounds like the ramblings of a soldier who'd perhaps maybe drunk too much when he was on duty, or maybe hadn't quite got enough sleep. But this is what makes this account more credible. There was a witness. An officer who was stationed in the bloody tower saw the entire event unfold, and he corroborated the soldier's story. Now, these obviously aren't the only accounts of ghostly apparitions at the tower. Over the centuries, guards, visitors, and even residents have reported seeing a woman in a Tudor dress near the site where Anne was executed, or wandering the chapel near where her body was laid to rest. Now we're going to travel to Norfolk, to Blickling Hall. This is where Anne Boleyn was believed to have been born in around 1501, and where she lived until she was about 4 or 5, before they moved to Hever. The haunting at Blickling Hall is perhaps the most famous and certainly the most theatrical of all of Anne Boleyn's ghost sightings. According to the legend, every year on the 19th of May, so the anniversary of Anne Boleyn's execution, something rather extraordinary happens. Legend has it that at midnight, a phantom carriage arrives, drawn by headless horses and driven by a headless coachman. Inside the carriage sits Anne Boleyn herself, either clutching her severed head or, in some versions, with it resting in her lap. The carriage travels up the long drive to the hall, where Anne's ghost then roams around the grounds until sunrise. I also think it's worth noting that Anne Boleyn isn't the only Boleyn who is said to haunt Blickling Hall. Her brother, George, who was executed just mere days before his sister Anne, is also said to haunt the site. His spirit is said to appear in a similar sort of fashion, arriving in a phantom carriage, but this time George is dragged around the grounds by headless horses. The Boleyns clearly can't escape this place, even in death. Now, interestingly enough, when I was researching this video, I came across an interview from Tracy Borman, who has actually visited Blickling Hall on the anniversary of Anne's execution. Now, she noted that this particular ghost story has an enormous following, and every year people flock to Blickling Hall and wait until midnight, hoping to catch a glimpse of this headless carriage and its tragic passenger. But this is where Tracy shows some scepticism. She finds this particular story to be the least believable out of all of Anne Boleyn's ghost stories, precisely because of how extravagant this story is, what with the headless horseman and the carriage. She said in her interview that it sounds more like something from a gothic novel rather than a genuine supernatural encounter. When Tracy attended the anniversary vigil at Blickling, she said that something quite moving happened. So in the half an hour leading up to midnight, the crowd fell completely silent. But she said that rather than feeling ghoulish or sensationalist, the atmosphere actually felt quite respectful, and it was almost like as if people were actually genuinely paying tribute to Anne as a woman who had died a very brutal death, rather than actually there for the ghost sensation. I will include clips from the interview if I haven't already done it.
Silence for the half an hour leading up to midnight, and I did get a bit spooked. I didn't expect to see the carriage or the headless ghost, but it was atmospheric, and I just thought it felt more respectful than ghoulish, if that makes sense. It felt that these women really connected with Anne Boleyn and her story, and really wanted to mark that, and not just that it wasn't just full of eager-eyed ghost hunters. It was more about respecting Anne Boleyn
and remembering her.
And remembering her. So midnight came, and the clock chimed, and it was all very spine-tingling. And then people just quietly dispersed. And that was it. So I found it quite moving.
Yeah, I'm pleased I experienced it, not as a ghostly kind of activity, but more just to remember Anne in a place that has a strong connection with her.
I also think it's worth noting as well that Tracy did mention that the carriage and the ghostly apparition never actually appeared during her visit. But perhaps that silence, that moment of collective remembrance, is more powerful than any ghost story. There are also reports of Anne's ghost being seen inside Blickling Hall itself, where she's dressed in grey, and wandering through the rooms where she spent her early childhood. From Blickling, we now travel to the south. Kent, Hever Castle, which was indeed Anne's childhood home. In 1505, when Anne's grandfather died, her father, Thomas Boleyn, inherited this beautiful moated castle. The location was perfect for Thomas's work at court and his diplomatic duties, so he moved the entire family here. Anne, along with her mother, grandmother and siblings, actually spent quite a lot of significant time at Hever throughout her youth and into her time as queen, and Hever definitely seemed to be some sort of comfort place for Anne. We know for a fact that, especially when Henry was trying to court her, that whenever she just needed to get away, she always retreated to Hever. So this place obviously had a special place in Anne's heart. We also know that Henry and Anne's romance truly blossomed at Hever. Henry would travel from court to visit Anne here, and the couple famously courted beneath an ancient oak tree that is in the castle grounds. The Boleyns also used Hever as a refuge during difficult times. Anne stayed here when she contracted the sweating sickness, and at other times when the family needed peace and privacy. According to legend, Anne's ghost returns to Hever every Christmas, appearing beneath that same oak tree that she and Henry once courted. She's also been seen on the bridge that crosses the moat. But perhaps the most intriguing account from Hever actually comes from Tracy Borman, who shared a story that Chief Curator Dr. Owen Emerson actually shared with her. So Emerson and a friend were exploring the castle after hours, and his friend somewhat flippantly just said,
"Boleyns, if you can hear me, give me a sign," kind of flippantly.
Immediately, all the lights in the castle began to flicker.
And then this light appeared in an upstairs window.
Naturally, they went to investigate.
Nobody there. Light had disappeared. They were the only ones in the castle. Now, you might say, yeah. Now, Owen is a straight-up guy. He's not going to make up a story like that. I completely believe him. And yeah, it really gave me shivers down the spine when he told me. And he said he just couldn't explain it. It's the only thing that's happened. And it was just in response to literally a plea. Come on, show yourself.
Now, the question is, was this Anne responding to their request? Was it an electrical fault or something else entirely? We can't know for certain, but it's exactly these kinds of personal experiences that help to keep ghost stories alive. Hampton Court Palace was one of the grandest residences in Tudor England, and Anne Boleyn, although she spent very little time here, did leave her mark here in more than one way. She had her own apartments here from as early as June 1529, when she was still Queen in waiting, and Henry was desperately trying to divorce Catherine of Aragon. Once she became Queen, Anne enthusiastically redesigned parts of the palace that had once belonged to Cardinal Wolsey, including the Great Hall. She wanted to put her own stamp on the magnificent building to truly make it feel like it was fit for a queen. But Hampton Court also holds a darker memory. It was here at Hampton Court, in the Queen's apartment, that Anne Boleyn gave birth to a stillborn child / miscarriage, depending on. And it was probably in the same room that her replacement, Jane Seymour, would give birth to her son, Prince Edward. Anne's ghost has been seen a few times at Hampton Court Palace, wearing either a blue or black dress. Both colours famously were associated with Anne. And here's where the accounts become particularly chilling. Some witnesses claim that she appears headless during these sightings. Imagine walking through, these grand Tudor corridors and then just encountering a headless figure. That must be absolutely terrifying. It truly is the stuff of nightmares, and yet multiple people have reported exactly this. Windsor Castle, believe it or not, does actually hold a special place in Anne Boleyn's story. It was here in September 1532, in a room now known as the Garter Throne Room, that Anne was created the Marquess of Pembroke. She was dressed in a crimson robe trimmed with ermine and wore a golden coronet. The ceremony established Anne as a high-ranking noblewoman with considerable wealth and status, all before she was even queen. This was Henry VIII's way of elevating Anne, making her worthy in the eyes of the nobility to be his consort. It was a public declaration of his intentions and of Anne's new place in the kingdom. But Anne's ghost has also been seen at Windsor, appearing in a location laden with painful irony. She's been seen standing at the window in the Dean's Cloister, the area closest to St. George's Chapel, where Henry VIII and Jane Seymour are buried together. Bear in mind, obviously, Jane Seymour is the woman that replaced Anne. The man who elevated her to such heights, who promised her the world, who made her queen, lies buried with the woman who replaced her. How gut-wrenching is that? There are also so many more disturbing reports from Windsor. Anne's ghost has been seen running down corridors, screaming, clutching her severed head. It's a horrifying scene that captures the violence and terror of her final moments. Interestingly, Anne isn't the only Tudor ghost that has been seen walking the halls of Windsor. Henry VIII himself is said to haunt the castle, walking around in expressions of agony, dragging his ulcerated leg and groaning in pain. Even in death, it seems that the Tudors cannot escape their suffering. Our final stop is Rochford Hall in Essex, a sprawling manor house that was once one of the largest residences in the county. A devastating fire in 1760 reduced the original building by half, but what remains is still quite impressive. The connections between Anne Boleyn and Rochford Hall is somewhat murkier than at the other locations. There are persistent rumours of secret meetings between Anne and Henry having taken place here during their courtship. Some even claim there was a system of secret tunnels beneath the house, providing a discreet escape route for the couple during their clandestine rendezvous. However, and this is important, there is no real evidence, unfortunately, that has ever uncovered any of these tunnels or indeed of any secret meetings to have taken place at Rochford Hall. The connection may be more legends than fact, perhaps inspired by the Boleyn family's association with the area. Nevertheless, people have reported seeing a headless lady at Rochford Hall. Other visitors describe experiencing extreme cold in certain areas of the house, a classic sign of paranormal activity in ghost lore. Some suggest this could be Anne Boleyn's ghost passing through. Though with such a tenuous historical connection, this claim is perhaps mostly speculative. Okay, so we have toured all 6 locations where Anne Boleyn's ghost is rumoured to haunt. But let's just take a step back for a minute and actually just ask the bigger question. Why, nearly 500 years later, are people still seeing, or claiming to see, Anne Boleyn's ghost? Tracy Borman does actually offer some fascinating insight into this phenomenon. She points out that heritage sites have this kind of supernatural energy, not necessarily because of ghosts, but because of their historical power. When you stand in a room where history actually happened, when you look out the same window that Anne Boleyn would have looked out of, when you walk where she would have walked, there's an undeniable sense of connection to the past. If you've been to any historical site, you will know exactly what I'm on about. Borman mentions visiting what's now called the Queen's House at the Tower of London. This building changes its name with the reigning monarch, so it's currently called the King's House. She talks about trying to understand what Anne could and couldn't see from various windows at the tower. For instance, there is a common myth that Anne could see the execution of the 5 men that she was accused of from her window. But in fact, the royal apartments where Anne was housed has now been demolished, and it's now actually where the raven's cage is. But if you go stand there, you would know that actually she couldn't see the execution of those 5 men. These details do matter because they show how legends develop. Anne Boleyn's story is inherently tragic and dramatic. She rose from relative obscurity to become Queen of England, largely through her own intelligence, charm, and refusal to just be another royal mistress. She changed the course of English history, triggering the break with Rome and the English Reformation. She gave birth to Elizabeth I, who would become one of England's greatest monarchs. And then, after just 3 years as Queen, she was arrested, falsely accused of crimes including adultery with 5 men, one of them her own brother, and then she was beheaded. She was 35 years old. Some historians believe that she may have been pregnant when she died. Doubt it. I highly doubt it. Her end was brutal, unjust, and shocking. Is it any wonder that people want to believe that her spirit is restless? I mean, if that had happened to me, you can guarantee I would be haunting Henry's arse. I also would have haunted Jane Seymour as well. The image of Anne Boleyn carrying her severed head, appearing headless, arriving in phantom carriages, screaming through corridors. These aren't just ghost stories. They're metaphors for injustice, for trauma, for a story that never really received a proper ending. How many of us have fantasized about what if Anne Boleyn had given Henry that boy? So, do I believe that Anne Boleyn's ghost really haunts these locations? Honestly, I don't know. I have been to the Haunted Gallery on Halloween, which I know this is Catherine Howard, not Anne Boleyn, but I didn't experience anything, and that kind of made me upset. I wanted to see Catherine or something like that. So with my experience with that, do I think Anne is roaming around doing a similar sort of thing? Probably not. Like I said, I haven't seen her myself, and many of these accounts, particularly the more theatrical ones, like the headless carriage at Blickling Hall, strain credibility. But I do believe that Anne Boleyn haunts us in a very different way. Her story haunts us. The injustice of her death haunts us. The fact that she was a brilliant, complex woman reduced to accusations and rumours, executed on false charges to make way for another wife, that haunts us. When people gather at Blickling Hall on the 19th of May, or visit the Tower of London hoping to catch a glimpse of her ghost, they're not just looking for the supernatural. They're participating in a kind of remembrance. They're acknowledging that something terrible had happened here, that a real woman suffered and died, and that we shouldn't forget her. Perhaps that's the real haunting. Not flickering lights, not phantom carriages, or headless figures in Tudor dresses, but the way that Anne Boleyn's story compels us, to move us, to make us think about power, gender, injustice and mortality. Whether or not her ghost walks these halls, her presence certainly does. Thank you for joining me on this Halloween special of Hannah's Raw Histories. If you enjoyed this video, then please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and why not leave a comment in the comment section down below about any paranormal experiences that you've had. And I will see you in the next one. Bye!